Passing through a few bushes still carrying that man, Shera finally gets back to her camp. The camp was comprised of 3 tents next to a small cliff, and a stream that went around the north of the perimeter that led down to a small waterfall. In the middle of the camp, 2 tieflings sat. Both sat on logs looking at the campfire that was in front of them. The 2 tieflings had different skin colors. One of them was crimson red with horns protruding straight from his forehead, rounded like goat horns, a scar that led from his lip to the bone on his cheek, his Roman nose scarred, his hair short, but long enough to be slicked back. He wore metal body armor that only covered his chest. Beneath that, a dark-colored shirt and trousers with dirty-looking boots. The tiefling just sat there, poking the campfire, trying to keep it lit. The other tiefling was cobalt blue. He wore ragged trousers and armor only covering his arms. He wore no shirt but sandals, also a belt that hung 2 plaited metal sheets down his thigh. His horns pointing straight up with a tied-up mohawk with tattoos covering both his arms, his eyes heavy trying to stay awake. Hearing rustling, the 2 tieflings turned to see Shera emerge from the bushes. The red tiefling got up smiling, saying, "Shera, you're home. Thank the Father, where were you?" The blue tiefling said not a word. All he did was smile warmly at her, just seeing that she was safe. Taking a step, the red tiefling noticed the human on Shera's shoulder. His face turned from happy to a mix of anger and worry. He says, "Shera, drop that human and let's do away with him before he wakes up." Shaking her head, she remarks, "We can't, Angus." Anger and frustration grow within Angus, with him raising his voice. "No, Shera, we need to finish off the humans that threaten us. You know what their kind has been doing to us, so we need to kill it before it kills us. Now drop him." Stepping forward, pointing to the ground. Shouting, Shera says, "Stop, you don't understand." The loud noises woke up the elder from her sleep. Out stepped an elderly tiefling hunched over, held up by a wooden stick she clung onto, her face covered by a white cloth. The white cloth was tied to her horns, that were broken in half as if someone cut them. She wore a large great plaid that covered everything from her shoulders to her feet. She walks out and stands beside the campfire next to the blue tiefling, planting the stick to the ground loud enough for Shera and Angus to fall silent. And behind the cloth a frail voice said softly but sternly, "Enough, Shera, bring the human to my tent." Saying those words and not a word more, the elder turns around and waddles back to her tent, with Shera looking worried following in tow, passing Angus giving him an angry look as she walked by him. As Shera walked past the blue tiefling gave a smile to say everything is going to be okay. Shera places her hand on his shoulder, smiling back at him as she passed by. Watching from the shadows, the dark figure just stands there, seeing all this unfold. Getting into the tent, with the elder standing in the middle with her hands raised using dryuct to move some boxes to make a makeshift bed. Inside the tent had near nothing, only a mere blanket and 2 boxes, with a pole that held up the tent with a lantern, lighting up the entire place. Placing down those boxes beside each other, dropping them with a loud thud, her hands feeling weak and flopping down. But she catches herself by placing them onto the stick quickly, feeling like she was about to nearly faint. Dropping the human to the floor with a bang, a slight pain irritated Shera as the human hit the floor, like as if a person smacked her with a plank of wood. Yet she ignored it, as she was more concerned about the elder. Shera puts her hand onto the elder's back. Concerned, she helps guide the elder to one of the boxes. Then, picking up the human once more, she places the limp body onto the boxes beside the elder, lifting his feet and placing them behind where the elder sat. Laying his feet down, she noticed that the human's legs were longer than the 2 boxes, so she let his feet dangle. The elder looks at the human for a moment in silence, then says calmly, "Shera, please don't tell me this is from the story I told you all the other day." Staying silent, it just guaranteed the elder was correct. Giving a sigh, she asks calmly, "What did you use to bind him to you?" Shera, feeling ashamed, mutters, "My blood." The elder moves her head quickly at Shera, raising her voice in frustration. "You stupid girl, your blood, why?" Raising her voice, Shera says, "Well, what else am I supposed to do to help our people? Human are murdering us. The elves are on the same side as the humans, and the dwarves, they don't do a thing to help." Putting her hand up, the elder intrudes, this time more calmly. No, it's not your motives I'm after. I'm asking why. Why your blood? Confused, Shera remarks, what else was I supposed to use? Finally, raising her voice loud enough that Angus and the blue tiefling could hear her voice outside, the elder shouts, anything! Frustrated and confused, Shera runs out of the tent, leaving the elder to look after this limp, lifeless body. Giving a sigh, the elder gets up and stands over the human, wondering why he is this way. The elder took a quick look across this human body. She first starts at the face, seeing nothing out of the ordinary, moving down to his chest, and again nothing. No scars, no bruises nor blemishes. Down to his legs, nothing either. But there was one thing she did notice, an aura surrounding this human. For her safety, she decides to use Dryoch to see what exactly he is. She hovers her hand over his body, starting at his chest. She utters Bran and scans his body. This gave her the ability to scan any type of body. The human's body was fully functional. He was breathing normally, his heart fully operational. Nothing felt out of the ordinary, so she moved up to his neck, still feeling nothing. She couldn't understand why he was unconscious, so she checked his soul, but all she could see was darkness. Until she reaches his face and stops at his eyes, feeling something. A moment passes with the elder, now having a pitiful feeling coming over her. She started to shiver, like as if fear itself grabbed hold, seeing a vision of nothing, only mere darkness. And in this darkness, she seen a figure in the mist of shadows turn its head to look at her. In fear, she stepped back, feeling like she was forced away from that human. She falls down, hurting herself. Meanwhile, outside, Shera sits on a stone close to the edge of the cliff, pouting in anger, like a child not getting her way. The two male tieflings went to bed, knowing Shera was safe. But she just sat there on the stone, mumbling to herself as that dark figure stood in the trees behind her, just watching. Sensing someone watching her, Shera lifts her head slightly, looking up at the sun as it rose in the distance. She says, "Why have you been watching me?" The being stays quiet. Shera continues, "You're him, aren't you? Are you here to harm us?" Again, the figure says not a word. And again, Shera continues, "If you are him, and you are not here to harm us, go to your body now." For this was the last time the figure gave no response. Turning around in anger, she sees no one. The presence that she felt disappeared. Confused, she just turns her head around again to look at the rising of the sun once more. Back in the tent, the smoke floated in, finding the human's motionless body, floating towards it, hovering over the face. Seeing there was no other way in, the smoke pried the human's mouth open just enough that it could slip in. It looked like as if the human just inhaled a large amount of smoke. The elder, not seeing this, however, she felt the presence that arrived into the tent. She was searching for an object, yet she couldn't find it, so she turned around, not being fazed, seeing the human sit up like an undead human. The man, wearing only trousers with long beard and hair, looked around the tent like a bewildered buffoon. While looking around, the elder noticed that this human had not yet opened his eyes. The elder, not scared, looks at this man and walks to him, simply saying in a frail voice, "Hello." The human said nothing. All he did was wave, not menacingly, but like a child shyly saying hi. The elder held out her hand, and the human places his on hers. The elder twists his hand, looking at his palm, with the elder saying, "You don't speak this language, do you? Then allow me to speak in this tongue, and dig into me Inish?" Nodding his head as he understood that, but he points to his throat with his other hand. Understanding immediately what he was trying to say, the elder utters, "Ah, you can't speak. That I can fix." The elder walked closer to the human and calmly pointed to his throat, saying, "This might be uncomfortable until I'm finished, but I'm going to give you the ability to speak like us." Without touching him, she points at his throat, uttering, "Kruhu." And with a slight irritating pain occurring in the middle of his throat, the elder adjusts his vocal cords. Moments pass and the pain subsided. The elder then asked in her weakening voice, "Say ah." He does as he was told and starts saying ah. As he did, the voice started to fluctuate up and down, deeper to squeaky, until the elder thought the sound matched the face. stepping back, putting her hand on the box, leaning on it. She takes a breath for a moment, then says, "Now can you speak?" With a breath, the human simply said in a deep and grumbly voice, "Yes." Nodding her head, she gained back some strength. She stood up as straight as she could and simply asks, "Okay then, what is your purpose? Are you here to harm us?" He responds, "No, I am a tool to be used by my summoner, nothing more." Understanding this, the elder just looks at the human for a moment. She then looks down at the box, giving a smile to herself, seeing something in him, yet nothing at all. She taps the human's thigh, meaning for him to move. The human gets up to his feet, watching the elder open the box and rummage through it. Eventually, she pulls out a 12-foot piece of cloth. The elder then flaps the cloth, laying it out on the floor with a bit of the cloth hitting the edge of the tent. The elder then kneels and grabs both ends and starts to fold it a dozen times until it had a few dozen folds in the middle of it and a bit excess at both ends. She stands once more, going back to the box, picking up a rope and places it underneath the fabric. Then she asks, "Lay down on it, boy." The human nods his head and lays down confused. He looks up at the elder, not knowing what to do. The elder remarks, "Make sure the cloth is just below the knee, then flap each end over yourself." Again he does as he was told, folding it right over left, with the elder saying, "This here was my husband's. I hope you don't bring this shame." The human utters, "I won't." Nodding her head, she kneels, tying the rope around his waist. The human then gets up with the plaid, flapping down, with the elder uttering, "It's a bit big for you, but that's a good thing now. Tuck in the two flaps that are in front of you into the waist behind you. Once you're done, grab both ends and put them to one shoulder." The human grabs them and tucks them into his waist, watching this. The elder stays silent, watching, until the human has the two ends at the shoulder. He holds it there, looking at the elder, as if to say, "What next?" The elder then goes back to the box, picking out an intricate designed knotted brooch. She brings it out and ties both ends to the plaid together. The elder staggers to her blanket and sits down on it, saying, "Your summoner awaits." The human stood there for a moment longer until he decided to go outside. The elder looked at the human as he was walking. His movement was like any other bipedal being, not stumbling nor bumping into anything. It gave her a lot to think about. Sitting outside, Shera hears rustling on the grass, getting closer. Not looking behind, she says, "You're finally in your body." The human simply says, "Yes." The human stops beside Shera as she starts to yawn, rubbing her face as the anger she had dissipated. Seeing this, the human says, "Master, go to bed. I'll watch the camp until you wake." Seeing no other choice and not wanting to wake Samson or Angus, looking at him, she notices his eyes were shut. But not having the energy to bring it up, she simply states, "We should be safe now. But fine. Rules do not. I repeat, do not harm anyone in this camp. None of us. If any harm does come to us, you will have to answer to me. Now sit here and wait for me until I wake." Getting up, the human sits where she sat, looking at her as she walks off back to one of the tents, yawning. Not seeming to be bothered, the human just sits there in silence, listening to the song of the morning birds. What seemed to be hours, the human just sat there. Then he hears rustling coming from another tent. He looks over to see it was Angus. He stepped out of the furthest tent and noticed the human was sitting on the stone. Really needing to relieve himself, he goes behind a bush, still being able to see the human, and starts to pee. Once he was finished, he walked to the campfire and sat beside it, with the human saying, "My friend, what are you doing up? I am on watch now. Go back to bed." Not saying a word, Angus kept an eye on the human as he sat there. Meanwhile, back in the void, in June's tent, Ella stops talking, seeing June asleep in the bed. She smiles, tucking her in. And once she was finished, she holds her hand out, saying, "Oskel." Saying that word, a door appears in front of her. Ella steps through, closing it behind herself, with the door disappearing as it closed shut, leaving June to sleep peacefully.